The wind sliced at her skin like the icy caresses of a dead lover. Martha clutched her shawl tighter around her neck, feeling the dampness of the fog permeate every thread of the already worn fabric. The cemetery before her was a labyrinth of tombstones and dancing shadows under the faint moonlight. It was then that she saw him, small and still, like a forgotten statue atop an unmarked grave. A boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Barefoot, in clothes far too thin for that winter night. His eyes, when they finally turned to her, did not belong to a child. They were as ancient as the very stars that witnessed that silent encounter between two souls displaced in time. Before we delve into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The village of Blackwood Creek had always been a forgotten dot on the map. Ancient stone houses, a church with a broken bell, and streets that abruptly ended in moorland and mist. Martha knew every stone, every secret whispered in. The taverns. Not by choice, but by destiny. When her parents died in the fever that swept through the region 10 years prior, she was the only one who remained, caring for the small library she had inherited from her father. 25 years old, dark hair always pulled back in a severe bun, eyes that rarely met those of others. The villagers treated her with the respectful distance reserved for those who live among books and silence. The professor's daughter, they'd say, as if that explained the strange glint in her gaze. Few knew that, on moonless nights, she walked through the old cemetery, not out of melancholy or despair, but from a strange sense of belonging she had never found among the living. On that particular night, something had called her with more urgency than usual. A premonition, perhaps. Or perhaps it was just the wind, which seemed to carry distant voices, whispers in a language she had never heard, but which somehow she understood in the marrow of her bones. The boy didn't move when she approached. He merely watched her with those impossible eyes, grey as the fog, deep as dry wells. Martha hesitated. All. The stories about ghost children and nocturnal apparitions that populated the local folklore now seemed terribly real. "Are you lost?" she finally asked, her voice almost inaudible beneath the wind's lament. The boy simply extended his hand, small, pale, with bluish veins visible beneath the translucent skin. There was no plea in his gesture, only an ancient certainty. Martha felt something within her recognize that call. Without a second thought, she wrapped his small body in her shawl and took him into her arms. She was surprised by his lightness. It was like carrying mist, a dream materialized just enough to have weight, but not complete substance. "What's your name?" she tried again. "Gabriel," he replied, in a voice that seemed to come from very far away, though his lips barely moved. The walk back to the library never seemed so long. The few lights from the houses seemed to extinguish at their passing, as if darkness followed them, enveloping them in a protective cloak. Martha felt the villagers' gazes from behind curtains, but no one dared to come out. In Blackwood Creek, one learned early not to question what happened after nightfall. The library occupied an old 2-story house on the eastern edge of the village. It had once been the residence of the region's most prosperous family, before the same fever that took Martha's parents also decimated the Thorns. Her father, a professor and scholar, had acquired the place for a pittance and transformed the ground floor into a community library, though few in the village could read beyond the basics to follow church hymnals. The upper floor was Martha's home, 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with windows overlooking the valley and, beyond, the mountains that guarded the village from the rest of the world. It was an austere space without the feminine touches one might expect from a young woman. There were no dried flowers hanging from the ceiling, no embroidery on the cushions. Just books, hundreds of them, stacked in corners, open on tables, marked with faded ribbons. She laid the boy on her own bed, noting how out of place he seemed among the white sheets. She lit more candles, watching the shadows dance on the stone walls. Only then did she notice that there was no dampness on his clothes, despite the fog outside. And his feet, though, bare, bore no marks of the cemetery earth. "You must be hungry," she said, more to fill the silence than from any real expectation. Gabriel merely watched her, still as a wounded bird that fears any movement. "I don't eat, like you," he finally replied, each word carefully pronounced, as if he were relearning to speak. Martha felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the way he said, "like you," that carried a world of hidden meanings. She shouldn't have been surprised. She shouldn't have been frightened. Somehow, from the moment she saw him in the cemetery, she had known he was no ordinary boy. "What do you eat, then?" she asked, surprised by her own calm. Gabriel hesitated. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the books, the candles, the reflection of the moon entering through the window. "Memories," he finally answered. "Dreams. Sometimes, when necessary, blood." Any normal person would have recoiled, would have screamed, fled, or at the very least, shown horror. But Martha was not like the other people in the village. Since she was little, she had felt different, as if she belonged to another time, another place. Her father's books, many of them ancient treatises on the occult and the supernatural, had been her only true company. There was nothing in that boy's eyes that she hadn't already glimpsed in the yellowed pages of those forbidden tomes. "You're a vampire," she said simply, without interrogation in her voice. Gabriel neither confirmed nor denied. He merely gazed at her with those ancient eyes, which seemed to contain ages of knowledge and suffering. "I am what's left of one," he finally replied. "A fragment. A memory." That night, Martha didn't sleep. She sat in a chair beside the bed, watching. The boy who alternated between periods of complete immobility and moments when his eyes scanned the room as if searching for something or someone. Near dawn, he finally seemed to relax. "He will come for me," he murmured, almost drowsy. "The Count always reclaims what belongs to him." "Who is the Count?" Martha asked, feeling the name reverberate within her like the distant tolling of a bell. But Gabriel had already closed his eyes, falling into a sleep so profound it seemed like death. His chest barely moved, and when Martha hesitantly touched his face, his skin was cold as marble. The days that followed established a strange routine. Martha kept the library running normally during the day, while Gabriel remained upstairs, avoiding the sunlight that entered through the windows. At night, he came alive, moving silently through the house, examining the books with a ravenous curiosity. She discovered that he could read in languages she didn't even recognize: Latin, ancient Greek, and other more obscure ones, with characters that seemed to dance on the pages. Sometimes he would translate passages for her, stories of lost kingdoms, shadow creatures, pacts sealed with blood. "How do you know all these things?" she asked one night, as he transcribed strange symbols from a particularly ancient book. "I can't explain," he replied, without looking up from the paper. "It's as if the words have always been here," he lightly touched his temple, "just waiting to be remembered." Gradually, Martha began to notice changes in the village. First, it was the animals. Cats that fixed their gaze in the direction of the library, motionless for hours. Then the birds that gathered on the branches of the tree near her window, silent, like sentinels. Finally, the villagers themselves began to act strangely. Conversations. That ceased at her approach. Glances that followed her as she crossed the square. Doors that closed more quickly than usual. Father Anthony, who rarely frequented the library, appeared one rainy afternoon. A middle-aged man with eyes that never lost the glow of genuine faith, despite years of service in a forgotten parish. "I've noticed you haven't been to Mass, Martha," he said, pretending to examine a volume on martyred saints. I've been busy, Father. Organizing the books is a never-ending task. He nodded, but his eyes scanned the ceiling, as if trying to see through it to reach the upper floor where Gabrielle was. They say you're no longer alone in this house, he commented, trying to sound casual but failing. Martha felt her blood run cold. How would they know? Gabriel never went out during the day, and at night he moved like a shadow, invisible to ordinary eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, Father, she replied, forcing a smile. Just me and the books, as always. There are rumours, he continued, lowering his voice, about lights in the cemetery at night, about a child with strange eyes watching the village from your window, about dreams people are having, dreams of blood and teeth. Martha kept her face impassive, though her heart pounded like a trapped bird. You know how the people are here, Father. Any shadow becomes a haunting, any noise a premonition. Father Anthony stared at her for a long time, as if trying to read her soul. There are things in this world, Martha, that are not in your books, or that are, but shouldn't be awakened. Be careful what you harbour under your roof. When he left, Martha locked the library door earlier than usual and hurried upstairs. She found Gabriel, sitting on the windowsill watching the sky begin to darken. They know, she said simply. The father was here. Gabriel showed no surprise. It was inevitable, he replied, his childlike voice carrying a resignation no child should know. It always happens this way. First curiosity, then fear, finally torches and crucifixes. I won't let them hurt you, Martha promised, surprised by her own vehemence. The boy turned to her, and for the first time a sad smile touched his lips. It's not for me you should fear, Martha. It's for you. When he comes, and he will, nothing else will matter. Not the village, not the father, not even you. I am just a beacon, a call. The Count follows the trail of his own blood, no matter where it is. That night, Martha dreamed. She saw herself in an ancient castle with endless corridors and ceilings so high they disappeared into darkness. She was not alone. She could feel a presence following her, breathing her name in the shadows. It wasn't Gabriel, but something larger, more ancient. Something that made the very air tremble with its proximity. She woke with a start, her heart pounding against her ribs. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in liquid silver. Gabriel stood at the foot of the bed, watching her with an intensity he had never shown before. You felt him, he said. Not a question, but a statement. He's getting closer. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the village changed dramatically. The wind brought an unusual cold for that time of year. Animals disappeared, first the smaller ones, then even watchdogs and horses. People began to lock their doors at nightfall, hanging garlic and crucifixes in their windows. No one came to the library anymore. Even the path that passed in front of the house was now avoided, with villagers making long detours to stay away from it. Martha felt the stares, heard the whispers, but she didn't care. Something inside her had awakened. An expectation, a hunger for something she couldn't name. Every night Gabriel seemed stronger, more present. His eyes gained a glow that almost hurt to look at directly. Sometimes, when he thought Martha wasn't watching, she caught him murmuring in a strange language, words that seemed to cut the air like small blades. A week after the father's visit, Martha went to the village for supplies. The silence that greeted her was almost solid. People who had known her all her life now crossed the street to avoid her. The only one who dared to speak to her was old Josephine, who ran the local inn. There's a man in the village, the woman whispered when Martha entered her establishment to buy candles. He arrived last night. I've never seen anything like him. Tall as an oak, pale as death, eyes that seem to burn when they look at you. Martha felt her heart quicken. What does he want? Old Josephine looked around as if afraid of being overheard. He asked about you, about the library, about a child. And you told him? Martha could barely disguise the tremor in her voice. "I didn't need to," the woman replied, her eyes wide with fear. "He already knew. He said he would come tonight." "Martha." His eyes, they weren't human eyes. Martha left the inn as if fleeing a fire. The sky was beginning to turn shades of orange and red. The sun would soon set. She needed to get back to Gabriel to warn him, though she suspected he already knew. When she reached the library, she found the door open. There were no signs of forced entry. The locks were intact, as if opened by someone who possessed the key. A strange scent permeated the air, something sweet and metallic at the same time, like overripe fruit and hot iron. "Gabriel!" she called, her voice echoing among the silent shelves. There was no answer. She ran up the stairs, almost tripping on the steps. The upper floor was silent, except for the soft rustle of curtains dancing in the breeze from the open window. The room was empty. On the bed where Gabriel usually stayed during the day, she found a single object, an ancient silver medallion with a crest she had never seen before. It was then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic sound of horse hooves on the dirt road. She approached the window and saw a black carriage stopped in front of the library. No visible coachman, though 4 horses black as night stood motionless, their eyes reflecting the light of the first stars like small mirrors. The carriage door opened and a man descended. Even at a distance, Martha felt the air leave her lungs. He was exactly as Josephine had described, tall, imposing, with a presence that seemed to bend reality around him. He was dressed entirely in black, except for a red silk scarf at his neck. His face was a work of art, sculpted from marble, perfect angles, a beauty almost painful to behold. When he raised his gaze to the window, finding her instantly, Martha knew there was no turning back. Those eyes, dark and deep as bottomless wells, had already seen her in dreams, had already called her through the ages. She descended the stairs as if in a trance. The library door opened before she even reached it. The man, no, the being, waited at the threshold, as if expecting an invitation they both knew was unnecessary. "Martha," he said, and his voice was like velvet over ancient stones. Finally. There was something in that voice that evoked memories that were not hers. Palaces of snow, balls by black candlelight, promises sealed with blood. "Where is Gabriel?" she managed to ask, surprised to still find her own voice. A smile touched the man's perfect lips, briefly revealing canines sharp as needles. "Gabriel is merely a part of me, a fragment I sent ahead, to prepare the way, to find you." "Who are you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer in the core of her being. "I have many names through the centuries," he replied, stepping inside the library. "But you, Martha, you have always called me the Count." The way he pronounced her name made something within her tremble, not from fear, but from recognition, as if every cell of her body responded to an ancient call. "You don't exist," she murmured, taking a step back. "You're just a legend, a horror story." The Count advanced, his movements fluid as dark water. "All legends have a grain of truth, Martha. And some truths are so ancient that they can only survive as legends." He extended his hand, pale with long fingers, bluish veins visible beneath the translucent skin. The same hands as Gabriel, Martha realized, but larger, stronger. "You know me," he continued, his voice now almost hypnotic. "Your soul knows me through the centuries. Why do you think you never felt part of this place? Why do you think your father's forbidden books called to you? Why do you think you walked through the cemetery on moonless nights?" Martha wanted to recoil, wanted to scream, wanted to deny everything he said. But something within her, something that had been dormant her entire life, began to awaken like a night flower, opening its petals to the moon. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice little more than a whisper. The Count smiled again, and this time he didn't hide his canines. "I want what I have always wanted, through the centuries. I want you by My side, my companion, my queen. A sudden vivid image invaded Martha's mind, herself in another time, another body dressed in red velvet and black lace, stretched out on a stone altar as the Count leaned over her neck. There was no fear in that memory, only a total surrender, a thirst that only blood could quench. Gabriel, she began, trying to cling to the reality that was quickly slipping through her fingers. He is part of me, the Count completed. A fragment of my essence that I sent to find you, to awaken you, to prepare you. Was then that Martha saw, a small figure emerging from the shadows behind the Count. Gabriel, but not quite the Gabriel she had known. His eyes now gleamed with the same supernatural intensity as the Count's, and there was a fluidity in his movements that no human child could possess. "You knew," she said, feeling betrayed, though she didn't know exactly why. "You knew all along." Gabriel tilted his head, a strangely adult gesture. "I knew and I didn't know. I am merely an echo, a memory. But you welcomed me, Martha. You recognized me, as you always do, in every life." The Count extended his hand again, and this time Gabriel took his place beside him, like a smaller shadow finding its source. "Come with us," said the Count, his eyes now burning like embers. "Retake your place by our side. Retake your memory, your power, your immortality." Martha felt the world spin around her. Images invaded her mind, lives that were not hers but were, loves she never lived but felt, deaths she never suffered but remembered. In each of these fragmented visions, the Count's face was present, sometimes young, sometimes ancient, but always the same eyes, the same presence. "I was once like you," she managed to say, feeling the words escape from somewhere deep within her. "I'm not anymore." The Count smiled, a sad, ancient smile. "You always say that, in the beginning, in every life, in every encounter. It's part of the cycle." It was then that Martha noticed, beyond the library windows, pale faces watched. Dozens of them, men and women of all ages, all with the same shining eyes, all with the same supernatural pallor. The Count's court, she realized, his followers, his creatures. "The village," she murmured, feeling a growing horror. "What happened to the people of the village?" The Count made a dismissive gesture, as if waving away an annoying fly. "Some joined us. Others served a different purpose. It doesn't matter. None of that matters now that we have found you." A distant scream reached Martha's ears, human, desperate. Then another and another. The village was being hunted, she realized, like cattle, like prey. "Stop this," she pleaded, turning to the Count. "Make them stop." For the first time, a shadow of irritation crossed the Count's perfect face. "You still care about them? After centuries? After all we've lived? You still cling to humanity?" "I am human," Martha replied, feeling an unexpected strength in her voice. The Count laughed, a melodious sound that held no humour. "That's what your current form makes you believe. But you are so much more, my queen. So much more." He approached with supernatural speed, holding her by the shoulders before she could react. His touch was cold, but it ignited a strange fire beneath Martha's skin. "Let me remind you," he whispered, his icy breath caressing her face. Before she could protest, the Count leaned in and his lips found hers. It was not a kiss. It was an invasion, a possession. Martha felt something ancient and powerful flow from the Count to her, like a frozen river suddenly liberated. Memories exploded in her mind, balls in long-destroyed castles, hunts under blood moons, rituals performed in languages dead for millennia, nights of ecstasy that mingled pleasure and pain in equal measure. And in all these memories, she was by his side. Not as Martha, the librarian, but as something more, someone with power over life and death, someone who drank blood from crystal goblets and commanded armies of shadows, When the Count finally drew back, Martha fell to her knees, gasping. The world seemed different now, sharper, more vivid. She could hear every beat of her own heart, every breath of the beings waiting outside, every distant scream in the village. "Do you remember now?" the Count asked, his voice soft, almost gentle. Martha looked up, and there were tears of blood in her eyes. "I remember," she replied, her voice transformed, deeper, more ancient. "I remember everything." Gabriel approached, his small fingers touching her face with reverence. "Mother," he said simply. The word pierced Martha like a sword. Mother. Not biologically, but in essence. The fragment the Count had sent. A part of him, a part of her, a creation of both. "How long?" she asked, still trying to sort the memories that now flooded her mind. 3 centuries since the last time, the Count replied, helping her to her feet. "Since the hunters found you in Prague, since the fire took you, and I lost you again." Martha, no, that wasn't her true name, she realized, touched her own face, feeling the skin that was beginning to change, to respond to the awakened memories. "Elizabeth," she murmured. "My name was Elizabeth." The Count smiled, and this time there was true joy in his eyes. "It still is, my queen. It always will be." Gabriel, no, not Gabriel, something older, something created from the blood of both, looked at her with anticipation. His features were already beginning to shift, becoming more fluid, more malleable, as if the child's form was just a temporary disguise. "And now?" asked Martha Elizabeth, feeling torn between 2 worlds, 2 existences. "Now we go home," the Count replied, extending his hand. "Our castle awaits us. Our court is gathered, and there is a world out there that has forgotten to fear us." Martha looked at the extended hand. A part of her, the librarian, the professor's daughter, the human, wanted to recoil, wanted to scream, wanted to fight against the memories that were not hers. But another part, older, more powerful, truer, yearned for his touch, for eternity by his side, for the power that had once been hers. The screams in the village had ceased. The silence was now complete, broken only by the occasional whinny of the carriage horses. "And the village?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "A necessary sacrifice," the Count replied. "Blood to awaken your blood. Death to awaken your immortality." Elizabeth rose to her full height, feeling Martha's human body transform, adapting to the true nature awakening within her. Her hair, once dull brown, now fell in black waves to her waist. Her skin took on a luminous pallor, like the moon reflected in a dark lake. "You always knew where to find me," she said, her voice now laden with the power of centuries. "In every life, in every rebirth." The Count touched her face with reverence. "We are eternal, Elizabeth. Even when separated, even when you forget, even when humanity temporarily claims you. Blood always calls to blood." The creature who once called himself Gabriel extended his hands to both of them, uniting them like a distorted family, a profane trinity. "Let us go home," said the Count, guiding her toward the door. Outside, the court awaited, pale and beautiful figures, with smiles that revealed sharp canines and eyes that glowed in the darkness. Some Martha recognized from the village, the baker, the blacksmith's daughter, Father Anthony himself, now transformed, now part of the eternal night. The carriage waited, its doors open like the mouth of a beast ready to swallow. The horses neighed, impatient, steam escaping from their nostrils like the breath of demons. Elizabeth paused on the threshold, looking one last time at the library, Martha's refuge, the humanity she had briefly inhabited, the books, the knowledge, the simple life. "Do you hesitate, my queen?" the Count asked, his lips brushing her ear. "I remember being human," she replied, feeling the last vestiges of Martha disappear like mist under the sun. It's always like this in the beginning, the sadness, the loss, the feeling that something precious is being left behind. The Count nodded, understanding. It is the price of immortality, to remember enough to value eternity, to forget enough to endure it. The creature that was not Gabriel took her hand, guiding her to the carriage. Its eyes were now identical to the Count's. And to her own, she realized, though she could not see her reflection. "Will we return?" she asked, allowing herself one last moment of human weakness. "Someday," the Count promised, helping her into the carriage. When the stories of this night are merely legends, when new generations inhabit this place and need to be reminded of the ancient fear they owe to the night. The carriage doors closed, and darkness enveloped them like a cloak. Elizabeth felt the vehicle begin to move, carrying them away from the village, away from the humanity that had briefly sheltered her. Through the small window, she watched the library disappear into the distance. A gust of wind lifted the pages of a forgotten book in the doorway, making them dance for a moment before they were swallowed by the darkness. "Where are we going?" she asked, feeling the last essence of Martha detach from her soul, like a dead leaf carried by the wind. "Home," replied the Count, his eyes shining in the darkness of the carriage. "To the castle beyond the snowy mountains, to the throne that has awaited you for centuries." The creature that was not Gabriel snuggled between them, its form continuing to change, to grow, to transform into something closer to its true nature. "And then?" Elizabeth insisted, feeling the ancient power course through her veins, replacing human blood with something darker, more potent. The Count's smile was both a promise and a threat. "Then, my queen, the world will once again know our name, and fear the night as it should." The carriage sped along the dark road, leaving behind the small village that would soon be just another footnote in the long history of their reign. Elizabeth closed her eyes, finally embracing her true nature, her true memory, her true destiny. The journey lasted what seemed like hours or days. Time lost its meaning in the presence of beings for whom centuries were just fleeting seasons. The landscape gradually changed outside the carriage window. Fields gave way to dense forests, which eventually transformed into steep mountains covered by eternal snow. Throughout the journey, the Count told stories of their centuries together, of kingdoms conquered and lost, of hunters faced and defeated. And gradually, Elizabeth's memories aligned, like pieces of an ancient puzzle finally finding their places. She now remembered her first life, almost a millennium ago. The daughter of a minor noble in a land ravaged by wars and famine, she had been promised as a sacrifice to the mountain demon, the being the peasants believed responsible for the misfortunes that afflicted them. But when the Count saw her, he recognized in her something rare, a spark that transcended mere humanity. Instead of draining her to death as he had done with so many before her, he offered her a choice. And she, young, frightened, but strangely drawn to the being of shadows, chose the night. "It was the first time anyone truly saw me," Elizabeth said, the memory now crystal clear. "Not as a monster, not as a god, but as I was." The Count nodded, his fingers intertwined with hers. "And it was the first time in centuries I hadn't felt alone." For 3 centuries they reigned together, building a court of nocturnal creatures, expanding their dominion through the mountains and valleys of Central Europe. But there were always the hunters, humans with ancient knowledge, blessed weapons, determination, born of fear. In 1640, in Prague, they finally managed to separate the two. While the Count dealt with an elaborate trap at the other end of the city, Elizabeth was captured. The purifying fire consumed her before he could reach her. "I felt it," the Count said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I felt every flame, every moment of pain. Our bond is too deep to be broken even by death." Elizabeth nodded, now remembering the agony, the fire consuming her immortal flesh, reducing centuries of memories and power to ashes. But it wasn't the end. Something in her essence was different from others of the Count species, something that allowed her soul to return, incarnating repeatedly as human, waiting to be found, to be awakened, to be remembered. How many times? She asked, mentally counting the fragmented lives that now unfolded in her memory. 7, he replied. 7 lives, 7 encounters, 7 awakenings. Sometimes it took decades to find you. Other times, like now, I sent a part of myself ahead, a seed, a beacon, a call. Gabriel, or the creature that used that name, changed as the conversation progressed. Its childish form gradually dissolved, like melting wax, revealing its true nature. Not completely child, not completely adult, something between worlds, a fluid entity created from the blood of both. What is he really? Elizabeth asked, observing the transformation. A homunculus, the Count replied, an extension of our will, created the last time we were together, when the fire took you, part of your essence merged with mine, creating this entity. He carries memories of both of us, instincts, purposes, but he is not completely conscious on his own. He is like a dream that takes temporary form. The creature smiled at the explanation, its eyes, now identical to the Count's, glowing with limited comprehension. There was nothing childish left in it, though its form remained small, compact, like energy condensed in insufficient space. He found me, Elizabeth said, finally understanding, like a compass finds north. He awakened you, the Count corrected, like the moon awakens the tide. The carriage began to climb a steep road, the sound of horse hooves echoing against ancient rocks. Snow was falling now, dancing around the vehicle as if obeying a supernatural choreography. It was then that Elizabeth saw it, rising above a precipice like a stone crown on the mountain. The castle, her castle. Black towers that seemed to pierce the sky, walls so ancient they merged with the mountain itself, windows that shone with red light like predators' eyes in the darkness. Ravencroft Castle, she murmured, the name emerging from somewhere deep in her memory. Our home, the Count confirmed, abandoned for centuries, inhabited only by shadows and memories, awaiting your return. The carriage passed through a monumental gate, carved with symbols that seemed to move when viewed directly. The inner courtyard was vast, paved with polished black stones that reflected the moonlight like dark mirrors. Dozens of figures awaited their arrival, all pale, all beautiful in a supernatural way, all bowing as the carriage stopped. The vampiric court, Elizabeth realized, ancient and new followers, gathered to witness the return of their queen. When the Count opened the door and extended his hand to help her down, a reverent silence fell upon the assembly. Elizabeth felt the weight of centuries of expectation, of loyalty, of adoration. She was no longer Martha, the lonely librarian. She was the queen of the night, risen from the ashes of time. The castle was exactly as she remembered, and at the same time, completely different. Corridors that stretched beyond what human eyes could see, staircases that seemed to defy the laws of physics, halls spacious enough to house armies. The Count led her through familiar paths, until they reached a circular chamber in the heart of the structure. In the centre, 2 obsidian thrones rose on a platform of red marble. It wasn't natural red, Elizabeth realized. The stone had been stained with blood over the centuries, absorbing the sacrifice until it became part of its essence. Your rightful place, the Count said, leading her to the throne on the right, where eternity bends to watch you. As she sat, Elizabeth felt the last connection to her human life snap. Martha was dead now, not just forgotten but truly extinguished. The transformation that had begun in the library was now complete. Her body was no longer human. It was something older, more powerful, made of shadows and blood and eternal memories. The court gathered around, maintaining respectful distance. The homunculus that had been Gabriel positioned himself at the foot of the throne, taking on his role as servant and symbol of the shared power of the nocturnal monarchs. "What do we do now?" Elizabeth asked, feeling the ancient power pulse in her veins like a second heart. The Count smiled, his canines gleaming in the torchlight. "First, we complete your transformation. The human body you inhabited for 25 years still retains frailties that must be purified." He made a gesture, and two figures stepped forward, dragging a man Elizabeth recognized. Father Anthony, still human, still conscious, his eyes wide with terror. "A welcome gift," the Count explained. "The blood of the faithful has always been the most potent for rituals of passage." Elizabeth watched the man who had tried to warn her, who had felt the darkness approaching his village, his parish, his flock. She should feel compassion, she thought. She should remember Martha and her respect for him. But those feelings seemed distant now, like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to her. "Bring him here," she commanded, her voice reverberating with supernatural authority. The father was forced to kneel before her. His lips moved in a silent prayer, his eyes closed, so as not to contemplate the horror in which his existence would end. "Look at me," Elizabeth commanded. When the father looked up, something in him seemed to recognize her. Beyond the face of Martha, she still maintained. "You knew," she said, not a question. "You always knew this day would come." "I always knew evil would return," he replied, finding courage in his final moments. "As it always returns, as it must always, be faced." Elizabeth leaned forward, studying the face of the man who faced his own death with a dignity few could maintain. "We are not evil, Father," she finally said. "We are simply older than your gods, truer than your prayers, more permanent than your faith." She extended her hand, touching the man's forehead with fingers that were no longer human. "But your courage deserves recognition, and your sacrifice will not be in vain." She turned to the Count, a decision made. "I don't want his death. I want his transformation." A murmur rippled through the court, surprise, confusion, perhaps even disapproval. The Count raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A transformed priest?" he questioned. "He will resist. He will go mad. Like all men of strong faith we have tried to convert." "Then this will be my first test," Elizabeth replied, "to see if I can bend faith instead of breaking it." The Count considered for a moment, then smiled, a smile that mixed admiration and caution. "As you wish, my queen. Your will is law in these halls." Elizabeth rose, feeling power flow through her like a contained storm. She approached the father, who now trembled not only with fear, but with comprehension of the destiny that awaited him. Worse than death, the eternal damnation his faith had always taught him to fear. "I see your soul, Anthony," she said, her voice soft, almost gentle. "I see your devotion, your goodness. I also see your doubts, which you hide even from yourself. The question that has always haunted you: why does a benevolent God allow so much darkness in the world?" The father tried to avert his gaze, but something in her power held him captive, unable to escape. "I offer no answers," Elizabeth continued, "only a different perspective. Eternity to contemplate the question that consumed your mortal life." She then leaned in, her lips close to his ear. "Your God created the light, but who created the darkness that came before? Who are we but the firstborn of that primordial darkness?" And then, with a movement too swift for human eyes to follow, her teeth found the father's jugular. The blood, warm, alive, laden with faith and fear in equal measure, flooded her mouth. awakening a hunger that transcended the physical. She drank not only the blood, but the essence, the life, the soul. She felt his resistance, his denial, his desperate prayer. And then, at the last moment, when life almost completely left him, she did what only the vampiric queen could do. She cut her own wrist with a razor-sharp nail and pressed the wound against the agonizing man's lips. "Drink," she commanded, her voice now in his mind and not in the air. "Drink and understand." The instinct for survival overcame faith. The father drank, first hesitantly, then with increasing avidity. Her blood was not like the Count's or any other vampire's. It carried memories of her multiple lives, perspectives that transcended mere immortality. It was blood of transformation, not just of enslavement. When she finally pulled away, the father's body fell backward, convulsing as the transformation began. It would not be quick, nor painless. Human death never was, even when it led to immortal life. "Impressive," commented the Count, observing the process with clinical interest. "You always had a different touch with converts. A gentleness that paradoxically makes them more loyal, stronger." Elizabeth returned to the throne, feeling the strength of the consumed blood course through her body, completing the transformation that had begun in the library. Her senses were now razor-sharp. She could hear the rustle of bat wings in the distant towers, smell the snow falling softly outside, see every dust particle dancing in the torchlight. "What will we do with the village?" she asked, remembering the pale faces she had seen through the library window. "With the people who were converted?" The Count made a sweeping gesture encompassing the hall. "Some are here now joining our court. Others remain there creating a new order. In a generation, Blackwood Creek will be ours. Not by conquest, but by gradual transformation. A bastion in a world that has forgotten to fear us. And the other villages? The cities beyond the mountains?" The Count's smile widened, revealing not only his canines, but an ambition that spanned centuries. "The world has changed while we were separated, my queen. There are cities of stone and steel, machines that fly, weapons that could challenge even our powers." He leaned forward, his eyes shining with anticipation. "But there are also opportunities we never had before. Means to travel instantly, to influence millions without ever showing our faces. And humanity, billions of them now, multiplying like never before, forgetting the old fears, abandoning the ancient protections." "They are defenseless," Elizabeth concluded, understanding his vision. "They are ready," the Count corrected, "like ripe fruit, waiting to be harvested. Not by force, which always generates resistance, but by seduction, by subtle transformation, by infiltration into the very systems they built to protect themselves from each other." He extended his hand, touching her face with reverence. "And you, my queen, have always been the mistress of subtle seduction, of transformation that seems like a choice, like the father who now reborn, like the librarian who remembered her true nature." Elizabeth closed her eyes, savouring the power that now flowed freely between them. They were not just lovers, she realised. They were two halves of an ancient entity, separated and reunited through the centuries, each time stronger, each time more complete. When she opened her eyes again, a decision had been made. "We will start slowly," she said, "as we always have. One village, one city, one region. We will establish our domains in the shadows, in the interstices of modern society." The Count nodded, approving the familiar strategy. "And then?" "And then," she continued, feeling the future unfold before her like a map. "When they are used to us, when they see us as just another urban legend, another tale to frighten children, we will reveal our true nature, and the world will remember why the night was its first fear." The gathered court reacted with silent enthusiasm. not with applause or shouts, but with an intensification of predatory attention, a stronger gleam in their supernatural eyes, an almost palpable anticipation in the air. The homunculus that had been Gabriel moved, its form now completely transformed, no longer child, not quite adult, but something between worlds, a fluid entity that existed to serve its creators. And I? It asked, its voice now a harmonious blend of the Count's and Elizabeth's voices. The vampiric queen extended her hand, touching the creature that, in a way, was their child. You will be our herald, our eyes and ears in the world that has forgotten to fear the shadows. You will walk among them, invisible in your visibility, preparing the way, as you always have. The Count rose, extending his hand to Elizabeth. Come. There is more of the castle to rediscover. Your chambers await, preserved exactly as you left them. And there is a complete rebirth ritual that must be performed before the sun rises. Together, they left the throne room, followed by the homunculus and watched by the reverent court. They passed through corridors that seemed to fold in on themselves, staircases that defied Euclidean logic, rooms that contained treasures accumulated over millennia. Finally, they arrived at a familiar chamber, the Queen's quarters, preserved as a sanctuary through the centuries. Ancient tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes of supernatural hunts and forgotten rituals. An immense bed dominated the centre, covered with black silk sheets and a red velvet canopy. But it was not there that the Count led her. Instead, they approached a smaller door, almost invisible in the ornate wall. Beyond it, a spiral staircase descended deep into the mountain's entrails. The sanctum, Elizabeth murmured, the memory of the sacred place returning like a wave. The heart of our power, the Count confirmed, where we performed the first ritual of union almost 1,000 years ago, where we can complete your transformation and restore all that was lost. They descended together, the homunculus following at a respectful distance. The staircase seemed endless, leading into the very heart of the mountain. The air grew denser, laden with ancient energies and aromas that transcended the physical, incense made from extinct herbs, blood preserved by dark magic, the metallic odour of time condensed in space. Finally, the chamber revealed itself, a natural cavern expanded and perfected over the centuries. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness, and the walls gleamed with veins of crystals that pulsed with their own light. Not natural light, but something older, more primordial. In the centre, a black stone altar rose from a circular pit filled with a liquid that looked like blood, but was not. It was darker, denser, almost alive in its consistency. Around the pit, symbols were carved into the floor, forming concentric circles of protection and power. The Well of Ascension, the Count said, his voice now reverent, where the first of our kind emerged from the primordial shadows before humans even mastered fire or built cities. Elizabeth felt the power of the place as a physical pressure against her skin. This was not just a place of ritual, it was a nexus, a point where reality became thin, where dimensions touched, where the impossible became merely improbable. Is this where I will become what I was again? She asked, approaching the edge of the pit. It is here you will become more than you ever were, the Count corrected. Each return strengthens, each cycle of death and rebirth expands. You are not just Elizabeth returned, you are Elizabeth evolved, Elizabeth transcended. The homunculus positioned itself at one of the points of the ritualistic circle, its presence completing a triangle of power with the Count and Elizabeth. Must I undress? She asked, vaguely remembering the ceremony's protocols. The Count smiled. The human body you inhabited must be left behind, completely. Not just the garments, but the mortal skin itself, the limited blood, the fragile bones. Elizabeth began to remove Martha's clothes, the last relics of the human life she had briefly inhabited. Each piece removed seemed to carry with it fragmented memories of that existence. The feeling of the morning sun in the library, the smell of old books, the simple taste of tea drunk as snow fell outside. When she was completely naked, she approached the edge of the pit. The dark liquid bubbled softly, as if recognizing her presence, as if calling her home. "What should I do?" she asked, though a part of her already knew. "Immerse yourself," the Count replied, his voice now distant, as if speaking through veils of reality. "Immerse yourself and remember. Immerse yourself and become. Immerse yourself and transcend." Elizabeth took one last deep breath, a human habit that would soon be just a distant memory. Then, with feline grace, she plunged into the dark liquid. The sensation was of simultaneous death and birth. The liquid was not liquid, it was pure consciousness, primordial energy, the essence of the darkness that preceded creation. It penetrated every pore, dissolving human flesh, rebuilding it with an older, more permanent substance. Memories flooded her, not just of her lives as Elizabeth and Martha, but of existences that transcended human comprehension. She saw herself as she had been even before meeting the Count, in eras when humans still vied for territory with other intelligent species now forgotten. She saw herself as she would be, in potential futures where darkness and light danced in delicate balance. Time lost all meaning. She could have remained in the pit for seconds or centuries. Eternity is not measured in human units. When she finally emerged, she was no longer the same. Not only had Martha completely disappeared, but also the Elizabeth she had known in her previous lives. What emerged from the pit was an entity of terrible beauty and ancient power. Her skin glowed with an inner luminosity like the moon reflected in dark water. Her eyes were galaxies contained in mortal orbits. Her hair floated around her like black flames, responding not to the wind, but to invisible currents of energy. The Count fell to his knees before her, not in submission but in reverent admiration. Even he, with millennia of existence, had never witnessed such a complete, such a perfect transformation. "My queen," he murmured, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. "My eternal one." Elizabeth extended her hand, touching his face with fingers that could now feel the very fabric of reality. "My king," she responded, her voice resonating in multiple layers, as if many voices spoke in perfect unison. "My companion through the ages." The homunculus prostrated itself completely, its fluid body trembling before the power that emanated from her. It was like an insect before the sun, a mortal before a god. "Rise," Elizabeth commanded, her voice gentle despite the power it carried. "You are part of us, our creation, our legacy." The creature obeyed, its eyes now unable to meet hers directly, as if the full sight of her true form was too painful to contemplate. The Count rose, extending his hand to her. He offered no garments. In this sacred place, to cover herself would be sacrilege. Her true form was too glorious to be hidden. "Come," he said. "There is a world waiting to relearn ancestral fear. There is an eternal night that needs its queen." Together they ascended the spiral staircase, leaving the sanctum behind. As they advanced, Elizabeth modulated her presence, containing the newly awakened power in a form closer to what the court had known. Not out of weakness, but out of mercy. Few beings, even among the immortals, could contemplate her true nature without going mad. When they returned to the throne room, the court awaited in respectful silence. The sun was about to rise beyond the mountains, but within the castle, the night was eternal. Time, a human concept, had no real meaning for creatures like them. Elizabeth took her place on the throne, feeling the ancient power of the castle recognize her, respond to her presence. The very stones seemed to vibrate in harmony with her renewed existence. "What do you command, my queen?" the Count asked, now in his role as consort and executor of her will. Elizabeth surveyed the gathered court, the pale and beautiful faces that awaited her words as divine decree. Among them, she noticed Father Anthony, his transformation complete, his eyes now carrying the supernatural gleam of the undead. But there was something different about him. A clarity, a consciousness that most newly transformed individuals did not possess. "Approach," she ordered, indicating the former priest. He advanced, moving with the awkward grace of one newly born to immortality. He knelt before her, not in complete submission, she noted, but in recognition of superior power, the same posture he had adopted before his mortal god. "Do you recognize me now?" Elizabeth asked, curious about his mental state after the transformation. The father looked up, his eyes, now the same supernatural gold as hers, meeting hers without fear. "I recognize you as I have always recognized you, even when I called you by the wrong name." "And what name would that be?" "Lilith," he replied, using a term they had not taught him, that he could not know unless he had access to memories older than his own existence. The first, the eternal. She who came before the light. A murmur ran through the court. It was an ancient name, a forbidden name, a name that even the Count did not use casually. Elizabeth smiled, a smile that contained the secret of creation and destruction simultaneously. "Blood remembers what the mind forgets," she said, more to herself than to others. She then turned to the entire court, her decision made. "This is my decree. Go forth into the shadows of the world, not as desperate predators, but as patient architects. Build our dominion in the breaches of civilization, in the spaces humans ignore, in the cracks between their consciousness and their fears. Take no more than you need, reveal no more than you should." She paused, her eyes scanning each face, imprinting her will on every immortal mind. "Time is our most valuable ally. Do not waste eternity with impulsive actions. Cultivate influence, not terror. Build loyalty, not enslavement. Humans will come to us by choice, not by coercion." The Count watched with growing admiration. This was Elizabeth in her most powerful form, not just Queen of the Undead, but strategist, visionary, subtle conqueror. "And what about the hunters?" someone from the court asked, an ancient vampire with scars that not even immortality could completely heal. "The hunters," Elizabeth replied, "are necessary. They are the blade that sharpens our cunning, the fire that purifies our species. The weak and imprudent fall before them, as it should be. The strong and wise prosper, evolve, adapt," she indicated the former priest, now transformed. "And some, the most valuable, can be converted not only in body but in mind. They can become our best defenses, our most effective recruiters." The sun was rising beyond the mountains, but no ray penetrated the ancient walls of the castle. Inside, the darkness was eternal, time an abstraction, power a living current that connected the queen to her consort, to her homunculus, to her court, to the very castle that was more than a mere stone structure. "Go now," Elizabeth ordered. "Rest during the day. Prepare for the night. Tomorrow, we begin to rebuild our kingdom." The court dispersed, each member retreating to their respective chambers deep within the castle. The Count remained by Elizabeth's side, his eyes never leaving her face, as if he feared she might disappear again. "After all these centuries," he said when they were finally alone, except for the homunculus who remained as a silent shadow, "you continue to surprise me." Elizabeth extended her hand, touching the face of her eternal companion. "We evolve, my love, as everything must, as everything does." Together they left the throne room, heading for the royal chambers they had shared in past centuries. Darkness enveloped them like a protective cloak, The night claimed them as its most beloved children. And in the depths of the castle, the well of ascension continued to bubble softly, as if it knew its work was not complete, that more transformations would come, that more cycles would unfold, that eternity was just the beginning of the true story. In the cemetery of a distant village, now empty of human life, the gravestones seemed to lean toward the castle on the mountain, like servants bowing before their returned queen. And in the abandoned library, the pages of ancient books whispered stories that no one was alive to read anymore, stories of the Queen of the Night and her eternal consort, of the darkness that came before the light, and of the primordial fear that sleeps in the heart of all creation. If this story found a mirror in your soul, leave a comment and share. Sometimes what hurts us is what makes us most human.